Morning, everyone. Let's come to order, please. I now call dockets number E2 sub 1193, E2 sub 1219, E7 sub 1187, E7 sub 1213, E7 sub 1214, G5 sub 632, G5 sub 634, G9 sub 722, G9 sub 781, and G9 sub 786, open for the purpose of receiving an update from the Low Income Affordability Collaborative as to the final report of that effort that was filed in these dockets on August 12th, 2022. By way of background, on March 31st, 2021, the Commission issued an order accepting stipulations, granting partial rate increase, and requiring customer notice in docket E7 subs 1214, 1213, and 1187. Also, on April 16th, 2021, the Commission similarly issued an order accepting stipulations, granting partial rate increase, and requiring customer notice in docket number E2 subs 1219 and 1193. In those two orders, the Duke and the DEC and DEP rate case orders, among other things, the Commission concluded that it would be appropriate for DEC and DEP to convene a stakeholder process tasked with addressing affordability issues for low-income residential customers. And the Commission, in doing so, established a timeline for the process, including deadlines for quarterly progress reports to be filed with the Commission. In January of 2022, the Commission approved or directed the participation of Public Service Company of North Carolina and Piedmont Natural Gas Company in the Affordability Collaborative. On August 12th, 2022, the final report of the collaborative was filed in this docket. And by order issued September 16th, 2022, the Commission issued the parties to appear and present the Commission with results results and recommendations set forth in that final report. All right, with that, I will turn it over to the companies to introduce themselves for purposes of the record, and Mr. Josie as well.
Robert Josie with the public staff on behalf of the using and consuming public.
Kendrick Fentress, I'm appearing on behalf of Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress.
And Kathleen Richard, appearing on behalf of Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas. We appreciate the opportunity to provide this update on the LIAC final report and to address any of the Commission's questions. The companies and the public staff wanted to bring 3 items to the Commission's attention prior to getting started this morning. The first is that Subteam D will not be providing an update today. There are no new substantive updates since the February briefing, but we would like to repurpose a portion of Subteam D's time to Subteam C update. The second item is early this morning, we learned that Ms. Whittington, who is a co-lead for Subteam B as in boy, will not be able to join Ms. Barnes during the Subteam B update. And then our final item is after the subteams have provided their updates, representatives from the public staff and Duke Energy will provide an update on the recommendations and conclusions. And I'd also, a fourth item, I do have hard copies of the slides if any of the commissioners would like the hard copies as we go through on the TV screens.
Okay. I actually would like a hard copy, and I'm assuming the rest of the commissioners will as well.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for that update, and I will count on you to call your witnesses as appropriate, and I assume we're going to start with Subteam A.
Yes, we'll be starting with Subteam A.
Okay.
We have Arnie Richardson with the companies. And we have Rory McLemore with Appalachian Voices as the leaders for Subteam A.
All right, I ask that commissioners hold questions until the end of the team's presentation, if possible, just in the interest of allowing gentlemen to get through their material. All right, if you would, please just introduce yourselves and then you all may proceed.
Good morning, Arnie Richardson with Duke Energy.
And Rory McLemore with Appalachian Voices.
All right, gentlemen, before you start, just make sure those microphones are pulled as close to you as possible so that everyone in the room can hear you, and then go ahead. Thank you.
So I'll kick it off this morning. If you think about Subteam A, there's really 2 different main deliverables that came out of this subteam. The first being the analytics and the data that describes the affordability challenges for our low-income customers. And then there's an assessment that kind of interprets that and draws some conclusions off of the data. So I will be speaking to the analytics, and Rory will be speaking to the assessment or the conclusions that came from that. So a little bit about the analytics study that we did. We covered this in February, but as a reminder, we did look at a time period before COVID. The time period was March 2019 to February 2020. We also only looked at customers that were active the entire 12 months to make sure that we had the full time period to look at trends with those customers. To get the demographic and housing data on these customers, we did have to rely on some third-party data. One primary source was a company called Axiom that we primarily use this information for marketing purposes. We also were fortunate enough to enter a data share agreement with DHHS, which gave us a list of customers that received LIHEAP and SIP assistance, which was very important to the analytics because we know that these customers are struggling and meet certain federal poverty guideline levels. Back in February, when we gave you an update, it was mostly around the descriptive analytics, right? So in the order, there were a bunch of different demographics, housing characteristics you asked us to look at, as well as some affordability metrics that you want to look at trends from. So those are things like arrears, energy usage, disconnect for non-pays and stuff like that. And we were able to successfully meet everything that was outlined in the order to look at to study the affordability challenges. We also worked closely with Sub-Team A members to enhance the analytics and add some more analysis on some other factors that we thought would be really important. For example, electric energy burden or the percent of income that goes towards the electric bill for our low-income customers. We also looked at what we call energy intensity or the kWh per square foot for our low-income customers. So those are two things that really stood out, and you'll hear Rory talk more about in the assessment update. But really, since February, what we have been doing is we've been creating, or we did create some logistic models to better understand the affordability challenges. The descriptive analytics that we did wasn't really getting into the variable interactions that we wanted to, and the logistic models allowed us to really pull out the key factors that were leading towards affordability challenges for our customers. So worked with the sub-team to design 3 different models. The first one were low-income customers below 200% FPG that met our arrears definition. Again, this was a definition that we just used for the analytics, nothing else. And it is customers that spend 6 months at least 1 times their average bill in arrears, or 2 months at least 2 times their average bill in arrears within a 12-month period. The second logistic model was low-income customers that received a disconnect for non-pay notice. And the third was low-income customers that actually got disconnected for non-pay, given that they did receive the notice. So these models, we worked on them in the interpretation of these models with the sub-team. It allowed us to create what we call impact scores for all of our different variables. And what that does is it holds all other variables equal and show what the impact of that variable was, right? So what is the impact of someone renting a home compared to, or once you leave all the other variables independent? So it really got us to understand the most important variables there. Overall, I think the assessment really benefited from these 3 models, and that's kind of what led to a lot of the key findings here and allowed us to really be data-driven throughout the rest of the collaborative as kind of a foundation for the recommendations that you'll hear today. So with that, I'll pass it off to Rory to get a little bit more into the key highlights and findings of the assessment.
Great. And I would definitely strongly encourage, if you haven't already, to take a look at the full set of slides. It's certainly one of the most comprehensive analytical projects I've ever seen on household and zip code level affordability challenges facing utility customers. So just want to congratulate their team for all the excellent work that they did.
Couldn't have done without you all.
It was a process. So a few of those things to lift up. One is, as y'all are aware, particularly again through the carbon plan process, but even going back to the 2019-2020 period that was analyzed, Approximately 29% of all Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy customers do meet that low income, less than 200% FPG guideline. And so it's a substantial number. And when they looked at their arrears definition, 1 out of every 6 customers met that arrears definition, which is fairly extreme. You know, a lot of folks might not meet that because they only are behind on their bills 3 months, but we know that they're struggling as well. And almost a quarter of all low-income customers met that definition. So there's definitely a huge challenge out there. One of the driving factors was that energy intensity, how much is being used per square foot, particularly in the winter months, but also the summer months. And for example, light SIP customers use 2 times more electricity per square foot in winter months than customers that were above the 200% FPG level. Key factors that both significantly predicted being in arrears and being disconnected for non-pay, and are also issues that new programs or existing programs and policies could most readily address were electric burden, that winter energy intensity, and the summer energy intensity. And those are, again, directly related to how inefficient a home is with trapping heat, or what type of heating and cooling system they have during those critical months. And finally, the house attributes were also statistically significant and suggest that focusing on renters, as already referred to, across all types of homes could reduce the likelihood of households falling into arrears. But there are a number of other takeaways from that are detailed in the assessment and also in their analytics that, again, I encourage y'all to look at. So thank you for your time on that.
All right, I will check in with commissioners to see if there are questions for these gentlemen. Go ahead, Commissioner Kleinfelter.
Help persuade me that energy intensity is meaningful. If I've got exactly the same stovetop and oven in an apartment kitchen as I have in a single family home, I'm going to have a higher, and I use it the same way. I'm going to have a higher energy intensity as you measure it in the apartment than in the single family home. Why is that meaningful?
Well, I think you're probably making some assumptions about the building itself. So, you know, a lot of folks live in apartments that are in big apartment buildings, and if you're in the center of the apartment building, you're sharing heat with everybody else, and so they're not having to heat as much. But if you have the same, so let me just understand, if you have the same type of heating stove, and the apartment is, you're not likely to use that heating stove if you're saying that the square footage of the apartment is smaller, and so you're using it the same. You're not likely to need to use it the same. You might burn yourself out of the house.
I'm asking it a much simpler question. I mean, isn't energy intensity really a measure of the differences in house sizes?
No. So just to use
Why not?
Because if you can't keep the heat in, your heater is going to keep going. So if it's poorly insulated, if you don't have proper air sealing insulation in the attic, if you have leaky windows, for instance, that is a house characteristic directly related to things that energy efficiency investments could improve. And so again, to use the personal example, I moved into a house, it was drafty because there was no insulation in the attic. And so my heating system kept running because all of that heat was being sucked up through the attic. Whereas if you live in an efficient single family home that's properly insulated, your heating system is going to cut off and your temperature is going to be maintained at your comfortable level that you want. And so it's directly related to how efficient a building is.
Well, it's indirectly related, isn't it? I mean, it's a factor because if I'm living in a well-insulated apartment and a well-insulated single-family home and both are energy efficient, just by virtue of size, I'm going to have a different energy intensity, right?
If that apartment is smaller and it's equally insulated, let's say if it's an HVAC system, it is going to shut off at an earlier time because it's heating a smaller space.
Okay.
And that heat's going to stay and it's going to shut off or turn back on much later because you have a smaller space.
So what you're telling me is that energy intensity is going to be more useful for me if I'm heating with electricity or cooling with electricity. That's going to be a more useful statistic for me to look at. But if I'm not heating with electricity, it may not be as meaningful, right?
And Arnie can speak to this. They did break that up.
Yeah, okay. I understand.
Yeah.
The second,
Can I add one thing to that?
yeah, sure.
If you look at the data, what the data shows for low-income customers is over a 12-month period, they do not use more energy than non-low-income customers, right? However, if you look at their winter usage, they actually use more energy in the winter. And you see that energy intensity kind of spike up for those customers. So what that tells me is that the base load, right, from the appliances that run every day or, constantly throughout the year,
Right.
isn't what's driving that sharp winter energy intensity that we're seeing. So we're seeing that in the winter, low-income customers use more energy, have a higher intensity. And to me, that points to opportunities with weatherization and stuff like that.
That's very helpful. Thank you, because it helps me put the energy intensity data into context. It's really something that I should look at mostly in terms of winter usage.
Yes.
Got it. Second-
Summer's there.
Yeah.
But winter, we're seeing the bigger opportunity.
Okay, got it. Second question is this, and it's not on your slide, so I want you to comment about it because it's not on the slide. As I looked at the data, I saw, at least if I were reading it correctly, and that's what I want you to confirm, is that under current rate structures, it looks like customers under 200% of federal poverty guidelines and LHEAP and CIP customers are under current rate design subsidizing all other customers. Is that correct? In the residential class.
The sub-team A scope did not look directly at.
Am I remembering something from this B team?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't have the report in front of me, so I couldn't remember whether it was a B team item or an A team item. I'll leave you alone. Okay.
I did flag that though. That was something that was analyzed multiple times throughout the process, not only for the LIAC process, but also the rate making stakeholder process.
Maybe that's where I'm remembering it from.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, the LIAC group did see the exact analysis you're talking about, and that is what it showed. It was relatively small, but it did exist.
but it's still there.
Yeah.
And the reason I call it out is because every time folks, before you did your study, before this study was done, everyone would simply come in here and tell us, oh, well, the low income customers are getting subsidized in the rates. And that's just not true.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner McKissick.
Thank you. And I guess some of my thoughts were coming along some of the same lines as Commissioner Clotfelder, but somewhat differently as well. And one of the observations that you shared was that that low-income customers at 200% of a federal poverty line are spending twice as much per square foot on heating. Now, in terms of the actual number of square feet they're occupying, I mean, did they disaggregate the data to see what size premises they were living in?
We did look at the square footage. I'm not sure we ever calculated the average square foot difference between a low-income customer and a non-low-income customer. What I can say back to that point, though, is back to the logistic models. Square footage was an input, right? So it tried to standardize for things like square footage and size of the home and everything else when we created those models to get what was the most important aspects up to the top, right? So that was kind of the reason we did those logistic models, to take some of those variables of like different size homes out of the equation and kind of create a baseline to figure out what was the most impactful.
I see. And in terms of, looking at policies that could, impact those particular customers, I mean, I assume most of these are renters as opposed to homeowners, although I suppose some of them might be homeowners as well.
We did show that renters overall were more likely to face affordability challenges than homeowners.
And I guess, did you differentiate between, say, manufactured housing, like mobile homes versus, more conventional stick-built construction? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how all of this is fitting together, because I can see there are certainly a set of people who are living in mobile homes or manufactured housing, some type of, you know what I mean, that how this works out in terms of policies that might ultimately be enacted to help specific groups.
Yeah, when it comes to manufactured homes, we did study that. It was a small percentage of the population, again, relying on third-party data, right? So it's information that we kind of had to purchase. But But overall, we're seeing that there is an opportunity for more energy efficiency measures across all types of homes, focusing on renters primarily, and focusing on the winter months that could help alleviate some of these affordability challenges, right? Bring down the usage and the energy intensity of these customers.
And I mean, I guess it's one thing to help renters through subsidies. It's a whole different thing to help the people who own those properties, get them up to a point where they're more energy efficient. So have you all given much thought to attacking it in both directions, where you're helping out those who may own the properties, actually get them to a point where they're more energy efficient through making weatherization improvements or whatever else might be required, as well as helping those that are just occupying the homes that are impacted due to the fact that they're not as energy efficient?
Again, Sub-Team A was kind of responsible for creating the data, the insights, and sharing that with the rest of the collaborative. And I think you'll see some of this does flow through to Sub-Team B and C and some of the recommendations that come out of the report that I'll let some of our partners speak to. So I don't think I'm the right person to speak directly
Okay.
to that answer.
Well, I look forward to hearing from the other sub-teams, I suppose, during the remainder of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a question, just, you had mentioned the, I forget what your adjective was, but agreement, exciting or helpful agreement you had for data sharing. I think it was our hope that this would kind of lead to some recurring data analysis and data sharing. And if you could just update the commission a little bit on if any of this analysis that you've did here is going to be ongoing. I think you mentioned you use data all the time for marketing. So is there any plans to use data for kind of tracking affordability, kind of trying to find outliers? I mean, you have it's a, first in class smart meter system in the country. Any analysis that's going to be ongoing for kind of linking future billing actions to this, not something that we would have to approve, just kind of applying all of this stuff that you learned into your normal kind of day-to-day customer interactions.
Short answer is yes, right? We hope to, use what we've started here and continue to enhance this and use it for, helping our customers as time goes on. I think that you'll see again in, I believe, Sub-Team C that, and even Sub-Team B, that there's some metrics and stuff like that we thought was really important when it comes to affordability. And we definitely do want to continue to use the data that we have available to support our customers.
And if I may, one of my general comments or recommendations is that we do need that ongoing data collection and tracking, particularly as we embark on implementation of the carbon plan, but also just looking at the data, the monthly data that's been reported in docket M100 sub 158, the COVID reports. The problem is not getting better. It's been getting worse over the last 12 to 18 months. Currently, the most recent report showed over $200 million in residential arrears still, and that's been true since February. 575,000 residential customers, more than 30 days in arrears. And so I think what Duke has done for the like process provides a great model, and we can expand that. And you'll see in the final report that the California Public Utilities Commission's low-income affordability rulemaking, they produced a set of metrics, a three-part metric, to track affordability changes and impacts over time of different rate changes, policies, programs. And I think we need that. We need an ongoing data reporting and tracking, ongoing analysis, not to put his job, give him more work to do, or his team, but we see the impact from this process. We've seen the impact. We can now really understand on a granular level who is facing those challenges, who's experiencing that, what the impacts are, who's getting disconnected. who's struggling with arrears on a continuous basis, what type of house they live in, where they live. And so that's the value to what their team has done to me is something that I think we need to capitalize on moving forward and use that to track those impacts over time.
Well, I appreciate that, but let me be a little bit more pointed. As of today, what's your status for data sharing with the folks implementing some of the other programs? Is that still in place? How are you collaborating with other folks that are collecting data and doing some of the same things today?
Yeah, so the Axiom data is we will get that on an ongoing basis. I believe that comes in quarterly through updates. So we'll kind of have that information. Again, it's primarily marketing, right? So it was already in place before this collaborative. It will still be in place after this. We are looking at internal strategies to enhance that. Nothing concrete yet about how to do that, but thinking through how we might be able to do that. I also know that there is a team working on the relationship with DHHS. I'm not exactly sure where that stands, so I'm not probably the best person to answer where that is today and where that's going in the future, but it is something we're looking into.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And then, I, as a Duke customer myself, I get helpful emails, a variety of marketing messages sent to me. Some of them are right on to my situation. Some are, you don't know, or you haven't analyzed my particular situation, so they're more generic. I guess my question is, with all the marketing prowess, is there going to be targeted messages to people that you identify as struggling in the past, low income, really targeted messages that take advantage of this data, like a corporation would do with business intelligence? I mean, is there kind of working in this affordability bent into how you interact with your customers?
The short answer is yes, right? I mean, we already have some like energy efficiency programs that are very specific to low income customers. And so we do want to continue to enhance that capability and make sure that, what the data is telling us is we're using that to make informed data-driven decisions and to better serve our customers. Again, I'm kind of the data and analytics guy, so I'm not as involved in some of these conversations downstream on how some of this is getting implemented, but as a company, we do have the right intentions to continue to use it.
I appreciate that. And as a data analyst guy myself, I'm just kind of trying to push it into the people that are answering the phone and sending out the bills. So I appreciate it.
Good questions.
All right, any additional questions for Sub-Team A? All right, gentlemen, we appreciate the presentation today and the work that you all have been doing. And I would like to just say one thing before I let you step down. Mr. McElmoyle, when you started your remarks, you thanked your colleagues at Duke, your coworkers at Duke in this endeavor. And I appreciate your expression of appreciation and gratitude to them for the work that they have put in. And I saw you acknowledge that and also reciprocate and say, couldn't have done it without you. And so I want to thank you for working together on this effort. This has been a big one. We acknowledge that, and you've put many months of time into this and a significant amount of effort. You all have done some great work. Our hope is that you've learned from it and you will continue to learn from it and utilize it to the advantage of customers in the state of North Carolina. But importantly for me at this moment in time right now is that it appears to me that you all have worked together in good faith to do this work. And when the commission directs the utilities and its stakeholders to engage in this kind of endeavor, it's our expectation that good faith collaboration and effort occur. And so I saw a demonstration of that this morning, and I want to say thank you for that. It does not always seem from where we sit that our direction to the stakeholders to work together is received. But this morning, to me, it seems it was received, and I appreciate that. The customers of the utilities will benefit from that. And ultimately, that's one of the primary objectives of this endeavor. So thank you for that. And I encourage you all to continue to work together as you have been doing. All right.
Thank you, Chair.
With that, y'all may step down and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for your time.
All right, Duke, Sub-Team B.
For sub-team B, we have Kenisha Barnes with the companies that'll be presenting. Again, Ms. Whittington could not make it here today, so Kenisha will be presenting on the entire slide deck or slide.
All right, Ms. Barnes, hope you have this under control.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for an opportunity to allow the LIC sub-team co-leads the opportunity to update you all on the work that we've done specifically since February. So as Kathleen just shared, I'm going to provide an update for sub-team B. I would describe the work for sub-team B to kind of in 3 buckets. One of the areas of focus was looking at what other programs have been out here that have been designed to address or assist low-income customers address electric energy burden. The other area of focus was what work had been underway in.
Does she need to pull the mic closer? They can't hear you in the back, Ms. Barnes, so just.
That never happens, so.
Okay.
One area was looking at what programs have been put in place to address and assist low-income customers with what we said more specifically around electric energy affordability. 2, what work had been put underway across the country. What other work had been done from a regulatory standpoint in other jurisdictions to address energy affordability. The third area was looking at and exploring a definition and/or metrics to address or measure affordability. So I start first with the program piece that we looked at. We had significant amount of help from a sub-team B standpoint that we had about 20 individuals that were very diverse that were part of sub-team B. And a number of those individuals brought different perspectives. Not only did they do work here in North Carolina, but they also did work across other states. So that right there was a value just to understand what was going on in other states. But we really spent some time really honing in on programs that, like I said, address affordability. And what we saw across other jurisdictions, and I'll talk a little bit about this from some of the states, is that when they looked at energy affordability, they looked at it from a comprehensive standpoint. And when I say comprehensive, it was not just the utility program by itself, it was not government-funded programs by itself, but there were a number of programs that collectively were coming together to help customers from electric energy affordability. We also looked at programs where, because a customer qualified for one program, they were automatically qualified for another. So some of the programs I'll talk about specifically here in just North Carolina, just to help understand is, I know there were a couple questions around DHHS and the data share agreement. And as Arnie and Rory mentioned from Sub-Team A, the analytics we were able to use included information for LIHEAP and SIP. And just to give a little bit about more color around that is through COVID, when there was work underway by the company to expand the winter moratorium to assist additional customers, we worked with DHHS to get an agreement in that they would then send us information that detailed customers who were LIHEAP and SIP. Similar to the company, there is a significant amount of endeavor and effort around protecting customer privacy. And so that right there required us to get a data share agreement that because there was a commission rule around this, that they could share that data. We then looked at with the low income collaborative and saying, okay, going above and beyond the commission's order around customers who are 200% of the federal poverty guidelines and 150%, what else could we do? We had this LIHEAP SIP data. We said, hey, this will be a great opportunity to look at these customers. Unlike the other customers where we were using Axiom data that Arnie mentioned, that is marketing data mainly that we use for marketing purposes, it is purchase data. It doesn't have the same level of certainty around it like the data that DHHS has, excuse me. And so with that, we were able to go back to DHHS and go into another data share agreement because the other data share agreement was really limited in scope that allowed us to look at LIHEAP and SIP customers as part of the analysis. So with that, we were able to look at what is the eligibility requirements also for LIHEAP and SIP customers. We were able to see how did those qualifications compare to other customers. And with that, what we identified is, in general, that most of the programs that we have in North Carolina, whether they be utility or government funded, they really weren't excluding customers based on if they were owner versus renter, or based on their heating source. The one common denominator was most of the programs were really targeted at customers that below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. That right there was a good point for us because it also showed us that as we look at making data-driven decisions on what solutions we believe will assist customers, then the data that we were looking at looked at those customers that were 200%. So the LIHEAP SIP program were two of the programs that we looked at. We also looked at the HOPE program that had funding coming in that was helping and providing renter assistance, but it also provided utility assistance. So those are programs that, like I said, in general, were at least 200% or below the federal poverty guidelines. That gave us an understanding when program design, like what is it that these programs were designed to target and assist these customers. We recognize that all programs may not have the same eligibility guidelines, and each program may be a little bit different, but that just gives you an overview of how we looked at certain programs that were designed to address energy affordability. The next thing that I speak on is from the work with Sub-Team B, is we also, like I said, looked at what work was underway across different jurisdictions to assist energy affordability or electric energy affordability. And as we put in our final report, we highlighted a couple of commissions and regulatory work that had been put in place. I know that Rory mentioned California, so I do want to touch on specifically highlight what's happened in California along with New York, just to give a little bit of context. So for the California Public Utilities Commission, they opened up what I'll call an affordability docket. Okay, and this was an affordability docket that had a number of parties that were participating, but they looked at electric energy affordability, or I'll say energy affordability because they did more than just electric. But they looked at energy affordability across the state of California. A lot of this right here was due to challenges with customers paying bills due to the price point of the product in California. And as Rory mentioned, they came up with 3 different metrics on how they were going to measure energy affordability in California. A little bit different I'll touch on is New York. In New York, similar, opened up a process, and New York has put a target in place that the average low-income customer's energy burden is no more than 6%. Okay, and that means that no more than approximately on average 6% of their income goes towards paying their utility bills. I call these 2 differences out because one of the things that I would say that was really telling as we did this work is we really never saw anything that it was cookie cutter, meaning that every state did the same thing. Where we saw that where states have really looked into this, they've leaned in to understand the challenges are within their state, listened to the stakeholders within the state, and really looked at the affordability piece across holistically across multiple utilities. With that right there, when we looked at the affordability piece, one of the things that we didn't see, unlike some terms that you'll see are pretty consistent from utility or throughout the industry, like SAIDI or SAFE, there was not any affordability definition that was consistent that said, hey, this is how we measure affordability or how you should measure affordability. Like I said, the dynamics have been different across the different utilities and more so, the jurisdictions. So with this, as we had conversations from a Sub-Team B standpoint, we did not come up with, hey, this is the definition of what we think affordability should be. From a metrics standpoint, because the metrics piece was very similar to some of the work that Sub-Team C is going to talk about, we said instead of being duplicative, we would handle the metric piece of what programs should be measuring against to determine how affordability is being addressed. Is it being approved for the very customers that it's designed how the programs are being designed to assist. So that right there is my summary of Sub-Team B work. Welcome any questions.
Ms. Barnes, will you repeat your last paragraph, just so I make sure I hear it?
Yeah, I think this is around the definition piece is what I was really honing in on, that unlike some industry standard definitions, whether it be SAIDI, SAFE, those examples, we did not identify there's an industry definition for affordability. And in talking with us, with Sub-Team B members, and then we later shared this with the broader collaborative in our March update meeting, we did not come up with, hey, this is a definition for affordability. And as it relates to the metrics piece, what metrics should be put in place to measure affordability as it relates to programs that are being designed? That work was very similar to some of the work that Subteam C was tasked with. And so instead of being duplicative, that work and those metrics and things were handled through the Subteam C work stream.
You mentioned the Pennsylvania PUC. Can you talk, are you familiar with the work they've done enough that you can tell us about it this morning, or is it sufficiently covered in the report?
It's referenced in the report, and there is a link, I believe, that is a hyperlink to the docket. The same thing is for California. The California information is actually on one of their reports, because they had produced the report, is included in one of the appendices.
Okay. Did you all sort of give weight to the efforts of these various jurisdictions? Like, did you say Pennsylvania, of the 3 jurisdictions that we looked at, Pennsylvania's was the least successful, or is the one that we least would like to replicate?
We did not look at it that way.
Okay.
We looked at it, what is the work that has been out here done? How does it differ between, is there any commonality? And so we didn't give weight to one versus the other.
Okay. Do you know whether, is this the first time, and if you're not aware, not a big deal. Is this the first time that the companies have coordinated with DHHS on this type of sharing of information?
To the level that I understand that we've done through what happened with COVID and what we've done now, this right here is to my understanding for this purpose, yes.
Okay, so this, I mean, and just by virtue of the fact that y'all had to enter into 2 different agreements with the agency, to me, that indicates a fairly formal level of sharing that was occurring. And I'm very encouraged by that. I hope that was a meaningful exercise for the companies. It appears to be, just based on your explanation to us this morning and what we can read in the report. And I laud the efforts of the company to establish that relationship with DHHS. Anything that the companies think that the commission needs to do or recommends that the commission do to continue to facilitate the information exchange, this commission would like to hear that from the companies. And again, I want to reemphasize that I have now had a good dose of state government, and it can be difficult to sort of make things happen. So I laud the patience and the determination of both DHHS and the companies to work together to figure out a way to share this information. Because I do think, just based on my very limited understanding of the way dollars flow into the state and are disseminated to customers in need, I do see this relationship as a very important one for customers. So again, good work, and I appreciate that effort. All right, let me see if there's anybody else. Commissioner Hughes.
Yeah, just following on the data theme again. I every time I hear data sharing, I perk up. On just a slightly different question related to data, that you mentioned, or the first group mentioned, that energy burden was just electricity. In your reviews of other states, has anyone succeeded in wrapping in on the energy side, gas? I mean, some places even use wood, but mostly for gas and electricity. And was there any efforts on your part, or did you identify potential needs to be sharing with our LDCs? That's sort of the, I guess, medium hanging fruit, and then the much higher hanging fruit is this commission hears a lot of concerns about affordability, but not just in electricity. We also hear it in the water side. And our water customers, many of them are paying our Duke customers. Any thoughts or discussions about a utility affordability issue index related, instead of just sticking to energy? Because we are hearing about these difficult decisions of, do we turn the heat off or do we turn the water off?
Yeah, I think both of those are great questions. And what I would say is that our low-income collaborative members, along with the company, recognizes that most of these customers that have electric energy affordability challenges are most likely having challenges with other utilities from that standpoint. But we also recognize the scope of the work from the collaborative piece, that this was Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas, which is the electric utility. So for that reason, that is the information we have accessible because those are our customers from that standpoint. So that is why I keep honing on electric energy affordability, not to negate the importance of other challenges, but this right here is what we could work with collaborative members to do analytics on and solve for. As we look at across the other states, and like I said, when you look at New York, when New York says 6%, they're not talking about 6% of your electric. They're talking about across the board holistically. If you look at the work with California, they too have pulled in gas, telecom. I mean, they pulled in a holistic approach. I think what differs there is that you have the commission or a regulatory body that's saying, hey, everybody come together and let's look at this together, versus the scope of this work was very different because it was just the electric piece from that standpoint. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm hearing a request for a recommendation from us, so I thank you for that.
All right, any additional questions? If not, we will let Ms. Barnes go. Thank you very much, Ms. Barnes. We appreciate your update this morning. All right, so Subteam D is up next, is that correct? Okay.
Subteam C is up next. We have Mr. Dietrich Clark with the North Carolina Community Action Association and Mr. Tommy Williamson with Public Staff.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to update the commission on our work through Subteam C. I'm Dietrich Clark. I'm with the North Carolina Community Action Association. I co-led the work for Subteam C. Through this work, we were tasked with investigating existing customer offerings and practices that are addressing affordability, which included EE programs, as well as bill pay assistance programs, the Helping Home Fund program, as well as DE Supplemental Security Income Bill Discount Program. In addition to providing the LIAC with overviews of the programs, just mentioned, Subteam C was also tasked with ensuring all Subteam C members were brought up to speed concerning the various tasks. In order to make Subteam C tasks more manageable and streamlined, my co-lead, Ken Samansky, and I devised a plan to create mini sub-teams to help address and investigate all the challenges put forth by the commission's orders. With the help of the Guidehouse, Duke, and the public staff, several mini sub-teams were formed. The roles of those mini sub-teams were three-pronged. Mini sub-team leadership included develop clear understanding of many sub-team tasks and questions and all required outputs and expectations. In addition, we also communicated any resources, needs, and concerns with the co-leads. They also considered task and deliverable timelines. As it relates to communication, those many sub-teams served as subject matter experts and professionals and advised the body for many sub-teams. They also ensure relevant and timely communication or disseminated, shared to co-leads and other Subteam C members. In addition to productivity, they develop and maintain many team plans, which included tracking all relevant efforts in Trello. We feel the mini sub-team approach was valuable and helpful in making a very complex stakeholder process streamlined and less challenging. Each mini sub-team acted as subject matter experts and had the responsibility of drafting both presentations and recommendations to other Subteam C members and the LIAC as a whole. The mini groups were very diverse in their makeup and leadership. All groups had participation from Duke and public staff members. In addition to that, Subteam C leaned on those that showed a natural interest in the topics at hand. For example, we created 5 mini working groups, which include statutory and regulatory working group, DNP and disconnect working group, as well as EE programs and energy burden working group, and rates and causation, and lastly, success measures and program impact working group. Some of these groups were merged together late in the stakeholder process. The Sub-Team C stakeholder process consisted of the following steps. One, data received and shared with the mini group. Two, mini working group discussion and meeting. Three, afterwards, the first draft of the recommendations were created. Four, many groups edits and drafts took place. And five, many groups prepared initial recommendations to present it to the larger LIAC. And then we went to the discussion as well as input from other Sub-Team C members. And then, of course, the final recommendations were drafted. As you can imagine, Sub-Team C members had the opportunity to participate in several discussions on the mini sub-team level and the larger LIAC level. This multi-pronged approach was helpful in ensuring all Sub-Team C members had the opportunity and the time to grasp these very complex issues. Over the past several months, Sub-Team C members held discussions and debates around rate design concepts, including cost of service, cost causation, and cost allowances. We also looked at minimum bill versus fixed charge and segmentation by residential class, as well as income-based rates and discount programs like Virginia's CAP program. And we also reviewed existing programs and helped to draft 22 new program proposals. With Sub-Team C and other LIAC members' help, the Low Income Energy Affordability Collaborative was able to draft 22 program recommendations for the commissions to consider. And the LICA recommendations cover EE, DSM, bill assistance, and regulatory procedures and others. So I will lean to Tommy to kind of talk through some of those proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Yeah, I'm Tommy Williamson, Public Staff, and yeah, the last bullet there on our page, talks about how we did put together a proposal process that did take quite a bit of time, but we were very, very pleased to receive 22 individual proposals from the members. And actually, if you'll turn to the next slide, there we go. We've got 2 slides detailing the proposals that were actually presented by members. And just a couple of notes, these are grouped in 3, between the 2 slides, 3 general categories. The proposal numbers that you see there are for identification only. They don't represent any ranking or scoring of the individual proposals. The summaries for all 22 of these are located on pages 60 through 77 of the main body. But in Appendix G, you'll find the full proposal. And in that, you'll see a breakdown of the scoring results by the members. Members were given 4 choices to vote, either to support with revisions, do not support, or abstain. And so within that Appendix G full report, you'll see how every member voted. You see all comments that came from any member on any proposal. I think very, very informative. Oops. And you can see that, let's see, we've had 10 that fit basically in the EE and demand side budget bucket. 1 was a bill pay assistance program, and then the remaining 10 were across different categories. So it's sort of a regulatory, procedural, and other bucket. So with that, that's open to any questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Kissick.
Sure, and this is a follow-up. I guess I had questions for Team A, and it looks like you are covering part of this. You talk about residential segmentation, and then I also noticed that under number 5 on your presentation, you talk about a manufactured homes energy efficiency retrofit and replacement program. What were your thoughts about how that work? Because I mean, when I think about customers, low-income customers, I think about what might be characteristic in urban areas, like major areas, but also what's occurring in rural areas where I assume you have a lot more people living in double wides and single wides, and some of them are on foundations and some of them are not. Some of them have insulation. You know, sometimes there's skirting, it's metal skirting or plastic skirting. That has to substantially impact how much heat loss they're having. So, I mean, was thoughts given to what perhaps this manufactured housing energy efficiency retrofit replacement program, how this would work or how this would be treated? I'd like to just hear a little bit more about that. Don't all speak at once.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for that particular proposal, that was led by Al Ripley with the Justice Center, as well as a few other stakeholders. So that particular proposal did get, a fair amount of support. In terms of implementation, I'm not quite sure. Can't really speak on that. It wasn't something that I helped draft, but we did see it within Sub-Team C, and it did start there.
Okay.
And I think some comments, I think where everybody, there was general consensus around, supporting, acknowledging everything you just said. There are issues with mobile homes and mobile housing, but how that transfers into, I think you mentioned earlier, ownership
Yeah.
of getting the housing up to an energy efficient level. And so the definitely broad support for energy efficiency programs. And so there was I remember a good bit of debate on this, on what all that included. So I'd say we didn't land on a full consensus there on what should be considered as part of the EE program.
I see.
Yes, sir.
It just occurs to me that, particularly for rural consumers, it's a big deal. And as, housing costs go up, in my mind, manufactured housing becomes an increased demand for it. And, so I mean, it seems to me that it's something deserving of attention. Let me shift gears though. Number 13, it talks about a minimum bill pilot program. Could you address that a little bit further in terms of providing some clarity of what was considered? It refers to Appendix G, page 39, and I've not gone back to the full report.
Yeah, and I'm looking on just in the summary on page 67 in the main body. You're right. This was a minimum bill pilot. I think there was, again, there was general agreement around it, but there was still, the specifics of tackling, the challenge in rate design of having a 14, in this case, they were citing the $14 a month fixed charge, and how this really does go crossover into rate design.
Right.
And so we had robust discussion here, but I'd say general agreement, you could see there was 62% support, and 14% did not support, and 24% abstained, which I think was the highest one that we had for abstentions. I think the company and the public staff also looked at this as it didn't follow cost of service principles, and so we had issues with that. But overall, the collaborative was supportive of an effort being made, but it's, again, not being able to solve it within the collaborative.
Got it. Thank you. I
Yes, sir.
appreciate your.
And just I guess going back to your question about the manufactured homes, from my memory, I think the group was focused on maybe implementing some measures on the front end in terms of the processes that are taking place in the facilities before those homes are being constructed. Felt that it would be, I guess, more advantageous to include measures through the actual manufacturing process versus on the back end. So I think that was kind of the thinking as it relates to that particular proposal.
I appreciate that. I mean, I can see that being certainly beneficial long-term. It's just that that's only going to impact newly constructed manufactured housing. It doesn't take in consideration the existing inventory where consumers are having the problem today. But I appreciate your report. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. I spent 10 hours in the air on Saturday, and so I had a lot of time to reread it. And so I want to ask you a couple of questions about some of the specific proposals that I was reading through. First, though, about an emission, I was kind of hoping that there might have been some proposal that addressed the question that I would describe as a single point of entry or a single point of contact for the various programs, especially on the EE and weatherization and demand management side. I mean, if low-income customers who approach the issue and want to do something about it, I mean, they've got a plethora of places they can go. They can go to the utility, they can go to a government agency, or they can go to a local nonprofit or a statewide nonprofit. And sometimes that can be a very daunting challenge to sort of put together the best package in order to resolve a situation for somebody who's got energy burden problems. And I was hoping maybe there would be some discussion about proposals to have a single point of contact where you might be able to cross qualify or qualify people for multiple programs and put packages together that combine resources from, say, the energy sector, from the utility sector, and from the government sector. I didn't see that. Was there any discussion of that concept anywhere in the working group?
I think there was discussion in terms of that, and just, I guess, looking at the various existing programs, there are some challenges, I guess, in looking at it or approaching it that way. But there were definitely some discussions of a process. I would say, and some of these programs are, I guess, independent of each other, particularly like this programs that Duke offer in terms of, share the warmth and, those type programs. As it relates to, I guess, weatherization, I would say that those programs are, of course, contingent upon, income qualifying. So there's, specifics there, that needs to be considered. I would say that in terms of some of the weatherization programs, folks are referred, to other programs, but there is no current process where, customers are automatically eligible or auto-enrolled. There was a lot of discussion about auto-enrollment processes as well.
Yeah, it's a question that I've seen it play out in county departments of social services in a number of contexts where they've tried to consolidate a single point of contact that then enables you to navigate the multiple qualifications and eligibility criteria and put together the best plan. And it would be great if we had something like that for the energy programs. I think that's going to be even more important as we start to see the federal dollars coming down now for some of the new energy assistance for individuals for energy efficiency. Sort of navigating through all of that is going to be difficult even for folks with postgraduate degrees. So to layer all of that on top of each other, I would sort of it would be a great thing if there was one person you could call and they could say, well, Duke's got this and your county has got this, and the local nonprofit agency that operates in your county, in Rowan County, for example, I know they were participating in the task force, they've got this, and here's how you can get it all together. That'd be a great thing.
Commissioner, if I could
Yeah.
respond, I would say, and thank you for that question. I would say for me personally, being part of the collaborative, I learned so much about the web of resources,
Yeah.
but who owns those resources. I echo Chair Mitchell's response about how we've seen the two agreements between the company and DHHS. I think those are planning to continue. But for me, it was just to see that complexity and how there were different levels of knowledge on who had what resource and how it was available to others. So I think maybe the seeds of what you're asking for may have been sown through the DHS agreements, some proposals that we've seen here. I think definitely the desire to do that is there. So now we just have to, make the rubber hit the road and make it happen.
Well, if we can provide any fertilizer or water for those seeds, that would be great to know. I want to ask
And
you,
I will
yeah.
say, you say that, and I think that the commission does have, a role here to push some of that along. So I thank you for that offer, and I think that's definitely some things we'll be talking about in the future to help that
I mean,
process.
it takes on renewed importance, and I'm linking back to some of the sub-team A work is when I look at the total impact of what you guys have done here, maybe it's because it's fresh in my mind coming out of the carbon plan hearings, but I'm looking at this and saying, wow, this is really important potential payoff in terms of reducing load and reducing demand and helping us achieve those carbon reduction goals. And so we need to be as sharp and efficient about these programs as we are about anything else that we're dealing with in carbon reduction. Let me move off to, I want to ask you to comment on another thing that stood out to me was, and it's about proposal number 15 about the moratoria proposals that you got and considered. I was struck in reading the comments that most of the what I call the direct service provider organizations, we're not really all that enthusiastic about moratoria programs. And I want you to just comment about that, if you will. Comment about the discussion that occurred inside the sub-team about that issue, because I noticed, for example, crisis assistance and the ROAN group and I think a couple of others that are what I call direct service providers, hands-on, they weren't really enthusiastic about moratoria programs.
I think from memory, what I recall is many of those service agencies feeling that maybe putting a Band-Aid on a wound, and it was actually putting those customers further behind because they were basically creating a bill that they knew they wouldn't be able to afford. And that was kind of the sentiment of those that, serve those populations, is that, just postponing the problem is what it was doing, and just making the bill more unreachable. Pushing them further in debt.
All right.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yeah.
Well, just following up on recommendation 15, so some of the proposals, I think we've already received some, I think there's the open docket. Some of them obviously are going to be subject to future action. 15 it seems to be kind of, if I understand it right, replicating what was done last year for the moratorium. And given that we're 6 days away from November 1st, and I don't know if it's for the two of you or for Ms. Barnes, is there an update on the moratorium? And I apologize if this is in Appendix G, but there were some unilateral steps taken, I think, by Duke to expand the moratorium. But then is that still in place? And again, if I have this in front of me, sorry, but I have a lot right now in front of me.
I think that would be best answered by the company. And I think Ms. Barnes is coming back up here on the next panel.
Okay. Well, hold off on that then. And likewise for that, just getting some numbers on how many customers were added when there was that expansion. I think some of the reporting we got would lump some of those together. But from what I understand, there's the traditional, I would say, very limited eligibility criteria. And then I think there's this large expanded criteria by adding LIHEAP and the crisis program. I'm just be curious if is that adding 80% to the list of potential moratorium candidates? Is it if there's any information on data for that? And if you don't even have it during this information session, I'd be curious about getting it afterwards.
Yes.
All right, any additional questions for these two gentlemen? If not, you all may step down. Thank you very much for your presentations this morning. Go ahead, Commissioner Clark.
I'm sorry, and I did have one other question. In the final Appendix G, there were a number of proposals that were lined through. What should I take away from that? What did that mean? I just didn't understand what that, did that mean it was withdrawn? Or did it mean that the sub-team discussed the proposal and rejected it? What did it mean that it was lined out?
I think you're referring to, I think we had two proposals that were combined. So we had a few that were combined in the end. So
Okay, and so the lined out ones just meant they'd been folded into something else. I didn't know whether it meant they'd been rejected or what it meant.
No, we kept the original content as submitted.
Okay.
And then the
Right.
authors got together and
I got
combined.
it. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
All right, last call. All right, gentlemen, escape while you can. All right, Ms. Fentress, Ms. Richardson, anything else?
Yes, we have Mr. Tommy Williamson again
Okay.
with public staff and Ms. Kenisha Barnes, who will be discussing the final recommendations and conclusions of the companies and the public staff in the final report.
All right.
We'll make this quick. So one thing, what we wanted to do was just one, give a little bit of context too around the final recommendations that we called out specifically in the report. There's a lot of information. Commissioner Clawfeather, I'm glad that you had 10 hours on a plane to read. I wonder how much of that time you stayed awake versus reading as you started this. But there are.
It was a riveting report.
We think so too. But what I wanted to do is give a little bit of context about how we came to write the report. Okay, a few things that the company and the public staff were committed to doing, especially working through this collaboration with low-income collaborative members over the last year. The commission has required us to file a final report similar with some of the updates that we filed throughout the timeframe. In the report, we wanted to make sure that the information was factual, meaning this is the findings of the LIAC. We never intended to make the final report say that this right here reflected every position of everyone in the collaborative. And so as you look at the report, you'll see what I'll call the content of the report that is really factual based. These are the findings. You'll see a number of places in the report where we call it the Duke Energy perspective. This right here was our intention to say this is the company. We don't want to say that this represents LIC members. And then there's also a section from the public staff. And that was our commitment to our LIAC collaborative members because we wanted to make sure that they understood that they would have a time to tell their perspective. We've had a great year to collaborate, and I'm glad, Chair Mitchell, you've seen some of that throughout the update today. But we also wanted to make sure that we didn't misrepresent anyone, and that was part of our commitment. So just wanted to explain that piece. Then that leads into what you see. There are a number of things in the report. There are a number of things that I think that require the commission to take action on. But we also wanted to make sure jointly with the public staff, what are some of the things that we wanted to call out? And those are the three things that we've laid out as the final recommendations that Tommy will go through, and then we'll be glad to answer any questions from that view.
And so, yes, on the slide you see before you, this is, we have three recommendations that we put forth. The first one is, and I think it's been touched on before, that the commission consider that the federal poverty guideline at or to or below 200% when determining the eligibility for the programs for to address affordability. That really, I'd say, was a consensus. Allows some consistency. If you look in the report, it shows other programs and how they are assessed at different levels. But we landed on 200% to be used to for determining eligibility. And actually, if you look in the report, excuse me, it's on pages 46 and 47 and 49. If you're wanting to go read further, Commissioner.
Can I touch on one thing?
Please.
And I think this goes back to Commissioner Clockfelder when you talked about how does it all come together. think, Tommy, you talked about a web. One of the things that we realize is the very customers that we are committed to assisting don't have the luxury of always taking off from work and going to 3 different places to apply. And we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to ease that process. There's this one-stop shop to a certain degree, or maybe 2 versus 2,000, from that standpoint. And so with that, when you talk about eligibility of programs, the more you can make the eligibility pretty consistent across the different programs, then when they become eligible for one, auto-enrolling or putting them eligible in another provides that sense of ease. We have some of that today with our weatherization program. Like you said, Duke has a weatherization program that we have. The state also has a weatherization program. And today, whenever a customer goes to their local agency and they apply for weatherization, they get the benefit of funding and participating in both programs, because the Duke weatherization program, what I'll describe, piggybacks the state weatherization program. You're eligible, that agency goes in, they complete an audit, and depending on what all needs to happen in their home, then they have funding that is available from Duke's weatherization program and the state's program that's funded through LIHEAP and DOE. That right there is what you want to have in place. You don't want them to have to go to 2 or 3 different places. So I know we've talked a lot about DHHS from a data share standpoint, but there's also this significant opportunity we have with DEQ because these 2 programs piggyback and from that standpoint. And we have had, throughout the collaborative, we've had somebody on the collaborative that's with DEQ, but since the collaborative, we have begun meetings with them to talk about, with DEQ, to talk about how do we share information, how do we make sure that those who need it most in North Carolina are benefiting from these weatherization services that we're talking about. And I think a lot of that too is kind of detailed in maybe Proposal 14, which is this voluntary forum of these groups coming together and having ongoing conversations. So just to tee that up.
And I would say what Ms. Barnes just went through, when I started working in the collaborative, I knew none of that. And that goes to that web of understanding how she described who was doing what. So I think the whole collaborative has benefited from going through and understanding that background. The second recommendation was for the commission to approve and adopt the metrics recommended in the collaborative for monitoring affordability programs and their impact that they're designed to support. That's on page 34 for more detail. And there's a fuller description there of those metrics, but they were broken down. And these are what you see on the slide before you are the categories. On page 34, there's a breakdown of individual metrics. I won't read them all. So good, okay. And then finally, last recommendations for the commission to initiate a rulemaking docket to review the existing regulatory consumer protections detailed in Rule R1211. And that's the disconnection rule. And that's on page 36 and 39 through 39 for that description. Yep.
And that one right there was, I think in the commission's order, there was looking at the disconnect policies, looking at the billing policies that are put in place, evaluating that. And as we looked at the Rule R1211 around disconnect for residential North Carolina, residential customers, one of the things that we all know is that the rules don't take into consideration who's low income versus who's not. It says consistently, this is how the rules are applied. And as we talk to collaborative members, a couple things that stood out from feedback that we received from collaborative members. One, because how the rule is today is including of everyone. Instead of us saying, hey, let's do this over here from this customer, this over here, maybe this is a phenomenal opportunity to look at and opening a docket that may look at the rule overall in totality, okay, from that standpoint. The other thing we recognize is anything that we would recommend would not necessarily only impact Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress, because of course there are other, utilities that is impacted by that rule. And so set from a more holistic standpoint, if there was maybe a rulemaking docket that looked at it, that maybe then decided how it considered affordability or low income, we could then participate in that process.
And those are our recommendations. And well, any questions?
All right, thanks to both of you for those recommendations. This sort of reality that is the way that assistance ultimately gets to the customer or benefits the customer's account. You all describe it as a web. It's very complicated. And my guess is the more y'all dug in, the more complicated you realized it was. So is there anywhere in the report that you reduced that reality to writing so that someone who's a policymaker somewhere in a different building could pick up the report or could read that section of the report and say, I had no idea. I approve these funds being doled out here and there, but I had no idea that the actual person that or people that these funds are intended to participate have to work so hard to get them.
Good question. So I would answer it twofold from two different lines. I think that from the weatherization standpoint, there is a section in there that we call the weatherization ecosystem. And that right there talks about the different players. And it shows you that there are a number of parties that are involved. State weatherization do, then there are what I'll call 20 agencies that do the work across the state. And they're like, it's a web. Okay, so I think we've tried it from a pictorial standpoint and words on paper. We've tried to describe that so that people understand the different point sections. I think there's a theme that goes throughout the report around partnerships and building these partnerships that are going to be key to ensuring that we're successful in addressing electric energy affordability. From the bill pay assistance standpoint, Chair Mitchell, I don't know that it's that black and white because of the different types of funding sources. We talk about some of the programs, but I don't know that it is intuitive, the complexity of the web that we talked about. One of the things that we talk about in the report, though, is that we are looking at, and from a Duke standpoint, and so I'm putting on saying Duke from a Duke standpoint, we've talked about some of this is from an affordability ecosystem. And we believe there are a number of tools that are necessary. Partnership is the foundation to all of this, but we think bill pay assistance, weatherization, and then how we equip our call center reps. I think Commissioner Caulfield is exactly what you talked about. How we make sure when customers call in, our call center rep is equipped to provide more specific information that helps these customers get where they need to be. So those are probably a few areas that you could kind of hone in on to talk about the complexity.
In the report, do you all describe, I mean, my understanding, let me back up for a second, is that during the pandemic and when the moratorium was in effect, you all did have to educate call center reps and ask them, they were instructed to respond and provide guidance in a way that they hadn't had to previously because, I'm not sure we'd ever had a moratorium like this in effect. So did you all talk about the work that the companies did in that regard in the report?
I don't think there's a lot of information in there around what we did through COVID. I think what we've done is we've talked about that some with the collaborative members as talking about the relationship with DHHS and kind of that right there being a jumping point to where we are now in some building a relationship.
And I mean, you use the word jumping point, and that's kind of what that's where I'm going is, the company took what at least in my mind is sort of first time effort to address the situation during the pandemic. My guess is there were many lessons learned, valuable, pros and cons of the approach. Is there anywhere that that's reduced to writing that we could look at that, or that others in the state can look at that and say, okay, here's this effort that Duke made. Here are the good things that came of it that could be replicated or that should be continued as we, move forward?
I think what we've done, and the report does talk about how the agreement started in COVID with DHS to get that information that fed into us using the LIHEAP and SIP data. But I don't, the LIHEAP data, but I don't think that it necessarily calls out probably at the level of detail that you may be looking for in the report from that standpoint. I think we've shared it very verbally with collaborative members, as Tommy mentioned, some of the learnings there, and then went to, okay, how do we build from that as we talk about LIAC and address affordability?
All right, well, that level of detail, at least in this commissioner's opinion, would be very helpful. So I'm not sure where you all can, accomplish that, but I'm just putting that out there. Be helpful to see. All right, questions from commissioners. Let me see. Commissioner Brown-Bland. Okay, Claude Felter and then McKissick.
If we adopt your first recommendation about the eligibility level, is the idea that would be forward-looking for new programs, or would you bring back in, review all existing programs and bring them back for adjustment of the eligibility criteria on existing programs as well?
Great question. So I think that for our low-income programs that are qualified as low-income, that are energy efficiency programs today, Commissioner Claude Felter, they are 200% of federal poverty guidelines right now.
So we don't have to do any backfill.
I think No, it's not backward looking.
Okay.
The other thing, though, I would say is that we stayed at the 200% based on what we've seen today and also the scope of what the commission's order has said. When we looked at customers below 200%. I think as Arnie mentioned, we also did a look at customers outside of the outside of the income guidelines. We looked at the struggling arrears definition. So we know that there are some customers that don't meet the income guideline of below 200% that are still struggling to pay their bill. I just share that to say that 200% is what has been looked at historically. That's what we recommended based on our findings. But we won't say, that doesn't mean that there aren't customers who are above 200% that are still struggling. So that may evolve over time, is what I'll share.
Okay, but your answer to the basic question is we don't have a lot of cleanup work or
I don't think you have any cleanup work, so it's all for it.
may I ask a second question? Okay, this is probably from Mr. Williamson. So if we follow you on bullet point number 2, sort of help me operationalize that in a concrete way. So in the next general rate cases, how's that going to show up when I'm looking at bill impacts and rate change impacts? What am I going to be looking at differently if I adopt bullet point number 2 in the next general rate case? What will I see that I'm not now seeing? You're smiling. I can see the smile.
Just go back over. Right. Well, and so as far as what you will see, and we're still, digesting this. Obviously, we have a case before us now in the DEP. And so as far as the metrics that are contemplated here, I'd say, well, we're still evaluating actually how we're going to roll this in.
Work
So-
in process. Work in progress.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
I won't push any more then. Thanks.
And it is a work in progress.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
We'll be watching. That's all I wanted to say. We'll be watching.
Understood.
Just to clarify that the earlier information request, I think there's a lot of data already in the report about LIHEAP numbers. And so I have all that. I think that just the easiest thing would be to just get an update on, and maybe just going into November, it would be helpful anyway, to just get an update on how many customers are in the utilities roles as qualifying for the traditional moratorium, just so we have that information. And that's the three-prong moratorium. And that's assuming that that's going to be what guides the moratorium starting in November 1st, unless there's plans to continue to operate with an expanded moratorium.
So Commissioner Hughes, just to make sure I understand, I think your question is outside of the LIHEAP SIP that we did for a limited time through COVID, understanding at some point after November 1st, like some update to the commission of how many people are enrolling in it based on the traditional, hey, this is what the commission rules say. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, we talk a lot about that moratorium, and when I read the moratorium, it looks pretty limiting. So I just don't know, is that 3,000 customers? Is that 20,000 customers? And I would just like to know roughly what's in that role.
And I think we can make a commitment to look and see prior to enrolling customers who are LIHEAP and SIP prior to COVID, what were those historical numbers? I think they were very low. To your point, is this three-pronged approach. I think, the other thing I would share related to the actual moratorium-related recommendation. The recommendation had 2 parts, and as you see in the Commissioner Clawfelder, because he's read it, knows probably better than me, but my memory, but as you can see, there are 2 things that the moratorium asks for. It asks for not only a winter that the rule says, but it also asks for a summer. Okay. So there's what the moratorium proposal asks for, and then you'll see what the company and others have said. Okay. I don't think at this point there's no action being taken on that recommendation right now, but I give you that just to let you know so that it doesn't leave you thinking, hey, we're doing something related to that today. But we can look at what are the historical pre-COVID numbers for moratorium and try to pull that information and get that over to the commission.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I'm not understanding. I appreciate that. But going into November 1, in 6 days, did I get from your comment that the expanded the expanded list of moratoriums still exist, or are you going to revert back to this other number, which is what I'm asking for?
My understanding is that as of, we no longer have the agreement with DHHS that was limited for that time frame in COVID. So as of November 1st, we would go back to how it was pre-COVID, which is the requirements, the three prong that are in Rule R 1211.
Okay, and that's the number I'd be curious about. I just want to share Chair Mitchell's comments about, for the Group A, how nice it is to see the collaboration. We know that this was a very big collaboration. I mean, when you see the list of parties that are in the report, so I just want to thank you for herding the cats. And it just looked like a really impressive ability just on the process side to get this done. Not to mention that a lot of it was done through very difficult convening situations that we are all living through. Do you have views about the process moving forward for dealing with affordability? I know there's one of the recommendations has an urgent repair partnership forum. Are there recommendations about, you probably don't want a standing 50-member collaborative, but are there other kind of ideas that you have that we have a lot of models now underway for different collaboratives, different convenings. Is that something that we should be thinking about? And you talked about the core implementing agencies, but then any thoughts on that?
Well, and I will say it's definitely another work in progress. We're still thinking about how this translates into the future. The education that we got and understanding all those dynamics. And I believe Ms. Barnes and I have talked several times about the new learnings that and I think the company has achieved as well. So I'm looking forward to where we recognize this is the work's not complete. There's more to be done. I think we're still digesting and figuring out what that future looks like, with the expectation there will be a future.
I think that this is what I would say. I mean, like I said, sub team 14 not sub team 14, proposal 14 is really kind of this volunteer forum. I think when you look at it, the parties that recommend that the commission oversee this voluntary forum, or maybe DEQ. So, from that standpoint, the company is very willing to participate in that voluntary forum. We believe that there's value in those conversations. But also, as I mentioned, there's these partnerships that we also know that are key and foundational. We talk about DHHS, we talk about DEQ, and some of those others. So absent it, we're still having those conversations. We have a lot of work. Most of the significant number of the proposals were related to our energy efficiency programs that have been proposed. That too has a collaborative. And so we are looking at internally, how can we bring all of this from a comprehensive standpoint, understanding there are a number of tentacles to bring that together. So there's work there on the way, is work in progress. I don't think it's a one and done situation. So we look forward to sharing more in the right forum as is about those updates.
Sure, and I very much appreciate your report and the recommendations that come forward, and I think the recommendations are excellent recommendations that should be implemented. I guess the thing that I'm still wrestling with, and of course, Ms. Barnes, you made reference to this weatherization eco-structure that's out there. I mean, we know that these low-income individuals are paying twice as much to heat per square foot. What we can do to address what I would call housing deficiencies in a more systemic way. And when I say that, it's great to help them with the high bills, but how can we stop the bills from being high? Okay, let's get back to the root cause of part of that. To approach the issue in a multifaceted way that gets down to the root cause of it. Can you share with me thoughts that might have come forth or recommendations that you might have to address that? Because I want to stop it from being high as opposed to helping them once the bills are high.
Yeah, great point, Commissioner McKissick. And this is what I would say to that. I think we think about it, and we've talked about it with the collaborative, and what are short-term challenges and opportunities and long-term challenges and opportunities. The short-term challenges and our opportunities, I would say exactly what you're talking about, bill pay assistance. Bill pay assistance is going to help a customer potentially lower their arrears today or avoid a disconnect non-pay. But if their bill is continuously high, it doesn't help them 2 months from now. And that's where the long-term solutions come in, where we believe is energy efficiency from that view. But we also have to recognize there are a number of challenges to getting energy efficiency measures installed in these customers' homes. And we talk about some of these in the report. One of those challenges is what we'll describe as health and safety. If I am going to Chair Mitchell's home today because she qualifies and I perform an audit, and she has a hole in her ceiling, or hole in her roof, excuse me, I'm not going to put insulation in there because it's going to defeat the purpose. Okay. But then there's limited funding for actually the investment needed for these customers to improve those health and safety measures. And so that's one of the things we talk about in the report. We are talking about with DEQ around the dollars that they get in, that come in, what percentage of them can be used from health and safety standpoint. Are there policy discussions that need to be had to see, okay, if that's the number that can change? Another barrier is, and we've talked about this, renters. Whenever you're going in, and if Chair Mitchell, sorry, you're my example right now, but if Chair Mitchell is renting this home, okay, a lot of the times, most of these programs require that the property manager or the homeowner give permission. If they can't get in touch with the homeowner for whatever the reason may be and they don't get permission, that then impacts the customer. And so what happens is these customers, for a number of reasons, go onto what the agencies call a deferred list. And they go on this waiting list. And depending on the local agency, there are 20 of them across the state. What we've learned is some agencies, after Chair Mitchell's been on the list for 12 months, because her income eligibility is only guaranteed for 12 months, they mark her off the list and she has to come back and redo the process. So this is where this partnership is coming in. This is where, hey, we are committed from a Duke standpoint to offering a weatherization program, but we're also committed to having conversations to being part of the solution and understanding with DEQ and others of what policies need to be put in place to eliminate as many of these barriers as we can, to ensure that these customers, to your point, get the weatherization services that makes their bill more affordable so that bill pay assistance may not be needed, long term.
Well, that helps. I mean, I think that's one thing we just have to focus upon in terms of a long-term strategy, because it's decreasing the bill from the outset rather than just helping to pay it once they receive it and it's high. But I appreciate all the work that's gone in on behalf of the collaborative and all the partners, and appreciate the recommendations that have come forward, and look forward to going through the report. I hope it won't take 10 hours.
Thank you. All right, with that, you all may step down. Thank you very much for your presentations today.
If I could just echo one thing, I just wanted to say on public staff and the company, thank you to all the collaborative members. Chairman, you said earlier about the collaboration. I call it a collegial environment. In 12 months, we had 9 multi-hour workshops, 50 plus sub-team meetings, multiples of those in emails and doodle polls. We've seen 22 program proposals. We performed a pitch day for everybody to present, did the program voting, created the final report, and I'd say through it all, like with any collaborative, there were strong opinions and beliefs that were core to each organization, but I think everybody worked through that. There was a great atmosphere for listening and learning that did take place. And again, just the collegial atmosphere that was throughout. So I'm glad you were able to see that today. And then we just express our thank you to everybody for making that happen.
Well, I appreciate that additional information. And again, thank you all for your work on these issues. Very important. You clearly have made a lot of progress. And so thank you. All right. Anything else, Ms. Fentress?
No, not from the companies.
Okay. Mr. Josie?
Not from the public staff.
All right. Commissioners, any last comments, questions for the group? All right. With that, then we will adjourn this session this morning. And again, thank everybody for coming this morning and for your participation.